All right, so good afternoon. This is the Budget Task Force Benchmarking and Efficiency Subcommittee meeting of Wednesday, July 12th at 12:30. We're going to be meeting as a subcommittee for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to go into the other Zoom link to join the other subcommittee to be a larger group. And the purpose of that meeting will be really to prepare for the July 24th public forum, as well as getting ready for our next actions moving forward and discussing who will be contacting which departments and which towns, so we don't duplicate or double our efforts. So with that in mind, we have a pretty standard agenda. We do have minutes to accept from July 5th, 2023. Thank you, Valerie, for preparing that. Does someone have any thoughts or comments or want to make a motion on those minutes?
I move to accept the minutes.
Give a second. Second. Great. So roll call, all in favor. Vibhu?
Aye.
Christina?
Aye.
Jenny?
Aye.
Amy? You're right, alternate. And then Valerie?
Aye.
And myself, aye. I should have confirmed, is there someone willing to take the minutes for this subcommittee section? And then we do have Jeremy on for the 140 part. Amy, well, thank you so much. All right. So our agenda is pretty fluid for our next 35 minutes. We've met last week, so that there might have been work done in terms of just research. I know that we're kind of getting close to perhaps starting drafting our sections, but really wanted to get the feedback that we're hoping to get on July 24th. So does anyone have anything that they want to update specifically from the last meeting or anything new?
I don't know. I don't know that I have like an ask or sort of an update, but I've been looking at, I've been looking at Acton Boxborough's FY22 actuals and sort of, I guess, manually tabulating them or to check that, to kind of build that trust in the DESI report numbers. And I think just doing it that manually builds, like, I just feel like I can speak a lot easier to how they set some things up by going through that exercise. It took a lot longer than I expected because they organize their school budget based on who manages like the department. So each school has its own sort of budget and a mix of function codes for each one of those. So I had to open up each chunk of those and pull into one big data set. But I did, so there's plenty of sort of learnings that I'm digging through that I saw of sort of differences or areas to investigate more. I don't have like a list that I'm ready to share yet. It's still in progress, but I guess sharing that that's happening and that it took longer than I thought, but it is in progress. And I think it's a worthwhile exercise, if not tedious. And I hope to do another district next, I guess.
On my end, I was able to get through all of the benchmark municipalities on the town side to pull out their health insurance costs. I also kind of picked and chose based upon what data I could get to on the operating budget, the school budget, the technical high school budget. So Christina, I know you've been keeping that spreadsheet and it's kind of just been a working document. I don't know when's a good time to share that with the entire group. There's a lot of tabs on that as well. Maybe we even walk through it today to show people the data that's collected and then how we move forward with that.
Sure, I think at some point it would be good to get that into OneDrive. I just didn't want to move it. If I know you were working on it, and I thought Vibu could access it, but if you can't, then maybe that'd be better to move to OneDrive. Do you want to walk through the tabs?
Yeah, why don't we do that? I'll give you sharing capabilities.
Okay. Okay, so you should be seeing the spreadsheet.
Yes.
Let me go back to the first tab. So the way I started this was I took the spreadsheet that Dan O'Donnell had initially created from, I think, like the Department of Revenue. So a lot of these sheets are from that original spreadsheet that Dan created from the Department of Revenue. So if we go back to this general socioeconomic, all of the data in here was pulled from DOR for the most part. The only thing I added was school enrollment, because I wanted to be able to have the pupil count for certain things. I actually just added this school enrollment as a percentage of the total population, just to try to get like roughly how many school age kids, like what the percentage was of school age kids versus the entire population. These highlights of green is a conditional formatting, and it was basically pulling out different towns that were plus or minus 15%. You can see the 15% down here. That's, you can change that number within 15% of Westford's population, just to try to get towns that were a little closer in size, because I was looking at that for something else. The rest of this I didn't really touch. This US Census data, I didn't touch this at all. This is all from Dan's original. The value by class is also from Dan's original. Some of this is kind of, just as a side note, some of this is kind of interesting, I think. I don't know if us or the revenue team wants to sort of dive into, actually, it may not be this one, it may be one of the other ones. Basically, the amount of tax levy that comes from residents versus commercial. I don't think anybody has really looked at that. And again, that may be more on the revenue side. The revenue by class, this is kind of what I was thinking of a little bit more, but again, I didn't touch this. But this tells you each of the towns and how much of their revenue comes from, the state levy, meaning property taxes, or state aid, or local receipts. I went through this quickly. Like sometimes you look at Westboro and they've got local receipts at 17 million, whereas we're at 8 million. So like, I couldn't really figure out what the difference was there, but that was sort of interesting to me. Again, probably more on the revenue team. Levies and rates, I didn't really look at this very much, but it's a lot of good information as far as, tax rates and stuff like that. The levy capacity, again, didn't touch this. But one thing that I did kind of notice was there are definitely towns that have more levy capacity than we do, which basically just means that in past years, they have not raised their levy the full 2.5%. Westboro was another one that did that. I don't know how. That could be interesting. Outstanding receivables, again, didn't really touch this, but Dan had Christine Collins look at this. So she's got some notes here explaining why some of our numbers may be the way they are. Okay, the spending by function. This again originally came from Dan's spreadsheet, the DOR spreadsheet, and I did do some of this editing. So some of this conditional formatting was me trying to get an average. So let's say for police, I added a dollar per resident column. And then I took the average across all of the towns. And this formatting highlights, so green is any town that is less than 10% below the average. And the red is any town that's, you know, the average plus 10% higher than that. So I was kind of trying to figure out who was outside of the give or take 10% of the average, who was much lower, who was much, you know, much higher. I think this is what led me down the path to what the heck is going on here? Why are we, like, for other public safety, we've got, you know, 1.3 million, and the next, you know, we're kind of an outlier there. And that's when I talked to Dan, and we figured out that these categories are not as sort of concrete as we would like them to be for comparative purposes. So I sort of dropped this spreadsheet to some degree, but there is some interesting stuff. Like if we look down here, this is where Tom Clay did his percentages. And if you look at the education, like, it's sort of interesting to see what percentage of the budget goes to education across all the towns. We're at, you know, according to these numbers, we're at 57%. There's a lot of play in what exactly this is showing, but anyway. Okay, so spending detail is the next tab. This is the one that I created. This is the one that I went through each budget and filled in all of these numbers based on each town's FY24 budget. There's a lot of information here. There was definitely certain things that, you know, may tell us something, may not. I certainly didn't do the entire budget, but I went through kind of major categories. So, you know, there's library, there's recreation, health department, council on aging, police, fire, dispatch, ambulance. This public safety total is a total of all of those, of ambulance, dispatch, police, and fire, because sometimes towns didn't separate out dispatch and ambulance. Sometimes I could grab the number, sometimes I couldn't. So that's why there's a lot of blanks in here. But to get a total, I then did that. There's a DPW, there's trash and recycling. There's also public buildings or facilities, because some towns pull all of that stuff out into a separate budget. Like you see, Belmont has $7 million in that budget. We have like 200,000, because that's not the way we do it. All of our sort of maintenance stuff is in each of the departments where that building is housed. And then I found a lot that had vehicle maintenance also pulled out. So I tried to pull that out. I did ask Dan for some other information on our budget. And from what I can see, we spent a little over $800,000 in FY23 for vehicle maintenance, like across all of the departments. You know, how that compares, I don't know, because I don't know how many vehicles each of these other towns is maintaining. I just added the school budgets to get kind of a percent of total and figure that out a little bit better. I did this late at night, so some of these numbers may not be 100%. I was trying to just get the town's public school and not the technical high school, not, you know, so I may be off a little bit on some of these.
You can compare that to my tab further in, Christina, once we get there, because I pulled out the school budget as well.
Oh,
so we can do a check on that as well as health insurance.
Yeah, health insurance I sort of gave up on because it was really tough for me to just pull out that health insurance piece. And then I wasn't really sure what I was doing with it. So potentially I can just get rid of this column. The goal here was to try to get a little bit of a better apples to apples comparison with all of the towns. And to sort of pick out who might be, you know, spending, who may have a good way of doing things. You know, I won't go through everything. We talked about trying to figure out which towns to talk to. And I know I was trying to figure out a way, like Amy had mentioned, doing something sort of more objective to pick out the towns. And when I looked at who So I picked a couple of things. I picked population size within 15% of ours and per capita income. And those are just the two that I decided to pick. Somebody may not agree with that. Maybe we pick something else. And the three towns that came up were Acton, Reading, and Westboro. So then I looked at what their spending was, and in most categories, they were spending less per resident than we were. So I thought that those three might be a good place to start. I just don't know enough about, like, Acton. I think is valid for us to compare to, because I think most residents seem to compare us to Acton a lot. Like, Acton is thrown around a lot, so I think it's probably valid. I think people will accept that. Reading, I just don't know the town well enough to say whether people would sort of buy into any comparisons. Westboro, I think, is probably good. I mean, I haven't been in that area in a long time. Kristen, you'd be a better judge, but I sort of feel like Westboro, might be okay. So that's what I kind of went back to. Maybe there needs to be a little bit of sort of a more of a gut feel from looking through these budgets and knowing the towns as to which ones we should really dive into. Because I'm thinking the main goal is to actually learn from them and be able to, if they're doing something interesting, be able to take it and apply it here. Wellesley's budget is twice our budget. Whatever they're doing, it could be interesting to see and say, hey, if you want your taxes to double, this is what we could do, but it's probably not going to fly here. I mean, honestly. Anyway, so I think that's all on this, but this was kind of the main sheet that I added to this. These financial indicators, I don't know what this is. I didn't look at this at all. And then I think the rest of this is probably you, Kristen.
Yeah, so this kind of piggybacks on some of Christina's sheet that we just went through, the spending details. So perhaps she and I can work to pare this down a little bit. This goes through each town and determines if they're self-funded with the GIC, which is a state health insurance program, or what they're with a joint purchasing item. So Christina, maybe we can clean this up a little bit and incorporate it into your tab. It also talks about if the town has a high deductible health insurance or health savings account, and that could be a savings in the future if we move over to high deductible program. So if you want to go to the next tab, this is where I went through every single budget for fiscal year 24 and the town meeting warrants. It's not all comprehensive because I kind of got a little bit tired in certain areas, but I do have the health insurance costs for every town in column J, I believe. So if you want to scooch over a little bit. And then I also do know if the health insurance is for town and school or town only. There are some areas where I have emails into the town administrator or town manager to ask about that. And I also broke down in a tab, I think probably F or something like that, as the school budget. So Christina, you and I can work together to incorporate some of this data into your sheets.
Okay.
And this, is helpful to a point. There are some areas where we just need to confirm the town meeting vote approved the budget as was presented in the budget book.
Can I just clarify in both? I can tell obviously in Kristen's tab, you're looking at FY24. Christina, remind me which budget were you looking at?
FY24.
Okay.
And I think I also added a tab in here, or might be another. I pulled all the US Census data for every municipality that we're comparing to as well. So that has population, it has median household income, it has population breakout. So I forget if it's in this spreadsheet or not. It might be on the shared drive.
Yeah, I don't see anything else here.
But
So
I
maybe
thought
it's
it was
in the
important to pull out the US Census data as well, especially when we're crafting our initial conversations to make sure that we're using apples to apples in that.
Yeah, I'm glad I almost started doing that last night, and I I stopped, so I'm glad I stopped.
Actually, it is, Christina, it is in this, it's in the second tab. So if you wouldn't mind just
Oh, is
going to
it
that
on
really
that,
quick.
on this one?
Yep.
Okay,
So the US Census website can do just a quick download, and it has a ton of data, households, degrees, bachelor's, high school, labor force, retail
okay.
sales, square mileage, population per square mile. So we can just use this wherever we feel necessary to lay the groundwork.
Okay.
I just have a question going back to the, communities that we're going to dive deeper into. And you made mention of the residential versus commercial revenue. And like I said, this is probably for the other group, but perhaps identifying communities where those numbers are similar, right? And,
Yeah.
And also choosing them, and maybe that goes on the other side, but understanding that we're coming with similar money, right?
Right, yeah, or at least the similar split. Like when I was looking at, I think it was Burlington, they have a lot of commercial. So I think it was maybe 65% of their property taxes are coming from residents, whereas ours is, I think, 80 or something. It's a lot higher. It might even be
Westboro
higher.
is like that too, isn't it? When
I
you,
think
That's
so.
probably have a lot. Yeah.
In fact, should be
they
able
have
to
some
Westboro
Route
has-
9 and yeah.
They have a lot more
Yeah.
commercial tax base than Westford does.
It's
I appreciate that point though, Amy, right? Because, it just changes what options you have if you have a bigger commercial base
Right.
in your town.
right. I think that's here. So I think it's this residential versus as percent of the total levy. I think it's this column that gives you that, and unfortunately we've lost, but like this is Acton, I know. And then Westboro and Westford. Oh, wow. So Westboro is actually like 70%, we're at 88.
Wow.
But yeah, it makes a difference as to who's going to be paying any increase, right? Or the bulk of it.
Yeah.
Yep. So I don't know if anyone has any questions. I've been, staring at this thing for a long time, and I sort of pulled away for a while just because I felt like I was just staring at it too much and, didn't know if I would really see much else. So I would appreciate anybody, asking questions about it. If there's a question that doesn't make sense, I think there's a lot we can learn from here, but I also think we need to go to the next level of really comparing services, because I think that's where the differences are. And some of these are all over the place, like some of the per resident costs, they kind of start to get out of whack when the population is a lot larger than ours. So it could seem like they're spending a lot less, but maybe that's just because they're dividing it over so many residents,
Well, it's like economies of scale, right? Like if you add one student to the school system, you don't need to add one teacher. And if you add 100 population, you don't need to add one police officer. So I think that's where it really gets mixed.
Exactly. So that's why I was trying to, sort of narrow down maybe the plus or minus 15% population to try to get something a little bit closer that might actually apply to us.
Is this the sheet that you and Vibu are trying to connect on to turn
Yeah.
into clusters? Okay. I appreciate that you have attempted to manually cluster your data in the absence of the pretty taboo charts.
Yeah. Yeah, it would have been a lot easier if I could just, reorder them in a certain section so I could see where do we lie, rather than looking up and down the list going, I think we're about in the middle, or I think we're,
Right.
so I don't know. I mean, at some point, I would love to dive in with either somebody or everyone in the group on each of these areas, but maybe that's before we talk to the department heads. I don't know how we want to proceed with that part of it, or we wait until the full group.
Christina,
So like,
is this spreadsheet uploaded into the shared drive
It's not-
benchmarking folder? Yeah, because
it's
I
not
see
yet.
exactly the same name, but
Yep.
it doesn't have the same tabs.
Right. So if you look at the whole name, I put my initials at the end of this one, but this one is just, I think I sent a link to everybody. It's on my personal OneDrive. But I can get it up there. At some point, I just want to make sure that nobody else is looking at it or editing it before I move it.
It's hard to sort of help you think through what makes sense as the next order of tasks and
Yeah,
until because I just haven't had a chance to look through it myself, but
right.
it does feel like we have the data now. Now what?
Yeah,
little
that
bit.
was Tom Clay and I talked on Monday just about a bunch of other things. He said, so how are you guys doing on your task force? Like, have you found any trends or what are you, and I'm like, well, I think we're very, very close with the data. And then it's, yes, what steps do we take from there based upon the efficiency?
I want to ask one question, like where we can act on this. For example, FTE is FTE something where there can be an action if we find that we have too less FTEs or too many FTEs, or this is not a topic of exploration, so that we know what we need to find.
I mean, personally, I would love to say that if we feel like I don't know, actually, Kristen, what's our leeway on the FTE numbers if they're too high? Or if we feel like they're too high as compared to other towns?
I think that's where we really need to get into those conversations of, do we have a special nuanced portion of our department dealing with something else that another town might not have? So when I think of efficiencies, FTEs could be one of them, but there's a whole bunch of other efficiencies. It could be regionalization for certain departments. It could be doing things a different way using technology, which could decrease an FTE, but could increase the technology cost. It could be a whole host of things that we might be learning from these other communities. So I don't want to pigeonhole ourselves in a corner about FTEs, but if we want to use that as kind of a checkpoint and say, wow, we are like 50% over in FTEs in this department, like where are we going wrong, or what are we doing different? I think that we can use that as a starting point.
Okay.
I feel like there's just this internal part that I hate to ask a question when I don't know where it will go. But you just mentioned regionalization, and I realized in my head, I quickly thought, oh, that's the other group, but no, it's really probably us, right? Because there are sort of challenges and new revenue, but so I guess the half-formed thought is, how do we sort of kick that off in parallel, since I feel like right now or is that something that you guys think would come later and be identified through the interviews and through the deep dives? Or is it more like somebody could start Googling ideas or case studies of how other municipalities have done some regionalizations, and kind of like, which way do you come at it? Do you like look for is the budget going to tell us efficiencies to look for that would lead to regionalization's ideas, or is there value in kind of zooming out and thinking, where has this been done elsewhere, and and having that like answer first. Did that make sense? And is that something this group should be doing in parallel?
So I'll just jump in with dispatch. That was one of the first things that sort of caught my eye, that we seem to be spending a lot more than other towns. Once I sort of pulled it out, you know, we are on the higher end. We're not the most expensive, but we're definitely on the higher end. And I'll actually add to the spreadsheet, I'll color code or something. There are many of these towns that do have regional dispatching services. And in fact, Acton is regionalizing with Concord, I believe. And Westboro is looking into regionalization. I don't know what that entails. I just have no idea how we would do that, who we would regionalize with, or even if it would save money. There was one town, and I can't remember. It almost looked like they were spending about the same or more than us, even though they were regionalized. So there's kind of that issue too. And I don't exactly know how that works with 2 different towns, 2 select boards. But that was sort of what I found, is that there are quite a few that are regionalized.
Is that something that's been done recently? I mean, is that something we can it's part of the interview process, right? Reaching out to those and saying, what was your reasoning? And
Exactly.
Savings and those types of things, right?
Yeah, which is why I keep coming back to Acton, because they either just went through it or finishing up their regionalization with Concord. I'm not sure where they are in that process, but they're moving forward with regionalization with Concord.
Yeah, and regionalization can also mean, you know, same expenses or even more expenses, but increased services. So, you know, veterans districts, health departments, dispatch, we obviously see regional school districts. I think our North Middlesex Council on Governments can really help us with that research as well, of what they've seen and leveraging that. So getting back, Valerie, to your question, I think we can do both, right? I don't think we have to wait for the data to tell us. I think we can, you know, go off and say, you know, not only what are Massachusetts municipalities doing for efficiency, if they don't want to cut services, what is the nation doing in certain areas, and can we actually do that? Because I think sometimes we get stuck in our silo of New England and don't think about what's being done nationally. And there's a ton of great government going on in other municipalities across the country.
This has been really helpful, because I feel like I obviously am familiar with school regional districts, but I guess I just couldn't even fathom sort of what was on the table as far as municipal services that have been going through that. And I turned to trusty Google, and there's a whole grant part of the mass.gov that lists a bunch of grant recipients who are like investigating regionalization opportunities. So I don't know if that interests someone to try to look into a little bit, and flush out where there might be something that sounds interesting that could apply to Westford.
I mean, we got the community compact grant, which I think you're talking about, for the sustainability coordinator, which we tried as a regional effort for fiscal 23 with Carlisle. So the opportunities are really endless.
There were several different regionalizations that I came across when I was looking through this. Dispatch was probably the biggest one, but veteran services was another one that a lot of towns had either shared, maybe it wasn't specifically called regionalization. There were some that sort of were, and then other ones that were just like, well, we share our veterans office with this other town, and they kind of split the costs. Health department, actually, I think, Kristen, is it Shrewsbury that has some sort of regionalized health department?
Yep, Shrewsbury has regional veterans, regional health, health with Worcester as the lead community, and those things are very, you know, you can do that through memorandums of understanding or agreement between the select board and if it's a city council or whatnot. So
And just by quickly looking, I mean, obviously some won't apply. Well, some of them at least seem more that apply more to like a rural community, but I just think it'd be interesting to see what else is out there.
So we have about 4 minutes before we join the other group. I don't know if anybody wants to talk about any last minute things for our committee. I don't know what the meeting schedule is going to look like moving forward, but I just pulled up the outline for the whole report and wondering if we need to start talking about who's going to be doing what in terms of the outline, or if we still need to do a little bit more research.
I guess personally, I feel like I'm just still in the weeds to like look to zoom out, and I don't feel ready to like zoom out or like kind of I can't even just think even output of the report yet.
So maybe Christina and I will clean up that spreadsheet and make sure everybody has that, and maybe that will bring some things into view and some other questions, and then we focus on our interviews both internally and externally.
And I'll plan to keep, like I said, I think the Acton deep dive, at least to me, helped me trust the DESE report out numbers. And then I was also going to sort of methodically go through the Tableau and see if there's areas like we kind of did in our last meeting, like where does Westford fall in the clusters, and are there learnings that we can do from those deep dives? So I'm hoping that I'll have something like that ready to share for next Wednesday or our next meeting, hopefully.
Does anybody else have anything else they want to ask or question or bring up?
I feel like before I personally can go on and do anything else, I feel like I'm at a point where I need to talk to our department heads, or somebody needs to talk to our department heads to kind of get a better sort of grip on what we do versus other departments, why there might be some differences. I never even thought about doing things with technology versus not. And, there's that level that I just don't have to go any further.
All right, well, I think we're gonna, Amy, go ahead.
Oh, just one last, yeah, I have those hours, and I don't know if there's a way to add those to the other sheets at some point. And I don't know if it's just those 3 areas. So I don't know if there are additional areas you want to dive down into. For example, is it important that we show class size, right? Teacher, is that going to be important? I mean, how far do we want to go? And what else would you like? Is there anything else we need? I can do a little digging if that's helpful.
So one of the things I noticed, Amy, was you had municipal hours of operation. I'm wondering if we also explore the hours that employees work. So I know some of our employees here in Westford work 40-hour work weeks, some work 37 and a half. Fire works a different schedule because I think they're 224s. Some towns that I'm aware of, their municipal employees work 35 hours. I don't know if this group thinks that is an important matter, or if that's just going into the weeds too much.
I feel like I saw that somewhere, that like people that towns, municipalities have realized efficiencies in like either utilities and stuff by having sort of like longer hours on Monday through Thursday and less hours on Fridays and stuff like that. So, I mean, certainly interesting. Yeah. I don't know how easy it is to find, but.
Yeah, I actually have done that. Well, Amy did a lot of that data collection, and I've done it for our surrounding communities just for a separate research project for myself. But there's two matters. There's one for electricity purposes, but also to give residents an evening opportunity to access town hall services if they work full time. But also on the employee side, if we're seeing such flexibility in the private sector of hybrid work or remote work, where in municipalities it's really difficult. So sometimes closing early on a Friday and working late on a Tuesday is kind of an added benefit to get employees to work for a municipality as well. So we should definitely add that to an efficiency section related to hours of operation from a multitude of levels. All right, so the other group is probably waiting for us. So if we all want to switch off this, and then there's another link that Dan sent over if you want to get onto that.